Iran is a country that has hidden its secrets for centuries behind thick mud brick walls, beyond mountain ranges, and under a veil of silence. We are used to hearing about Persian carpets, poetry, and hospitality. But behind the beautiful facade hide stories that make your skin crawl. Some are connected to ancient rituals, others to forgotten catastrophes, and still others to places where even locals are afraid to enter to this day. These are not fables or urban legends. These are real facts confirmed by historians, archaeologists, and eyewitnesses. 7 stories, 7 mysteries, each revealing a completely unexpected side of the country we think we know. But in reality, we know almost nothing about it. Before we begin, it is important to understand one thing. Iran is not just a country. It is a geological and historical palimpsest. Text written over other text. Over a third, over a fourth. Each century left its own layer. Temples were built on the ruins of other temples. Cities grew on the bones of previous cities. New roads were laid along the routes of caravan trails that had existed for millennia. Dig into the earth in any Iranian city, and you are highly likely to stumble upon something several thousand years old. This creates a special atmosphere. In Iran, the past does not lie somewhere in a museum behind glass. It is literally under your feet. It seeps through the walls. It rises from the ground every time someone picks up a shovel. The first mystery begins with a place most people have never heard of, the Towers of Silence. On the outskirts of the Iranian city of Yazd, in the middle of the sun-scorched desert, stand 2 low stone hills with flat tops. From a distance, they look like ordinary natural elevations, and a tourist unaware of their history might pass by without even noticing. But if you climb to the top along the narrow stone path and look inside, you will see a circular platform paved with stone and a shallow pit in the center. This is a dakhma, a Zoroastrian funerary structure, and what took place here for millennia makes the modern person shudder. Zoroastrians, followers of the world's oldest monotheistic religion, considered earth, water, and fire to be sacred elements that must not be defiled by dead flesh. Burial in the ground was unthinkable because it would defile the earth. Cremation was impossible because fire is the most sacred of the elements, and throwing a dead body into it was the greatest sin. Immersion in water was also excluded. The only way out was to give the body to the birds. The body of the deceased was carried to the top of the Tower of Silence and laid on the stone platform. Men were placed in the outer circle, women in the middle, and children in the inner circle, closer to the central pit. And then the vultures came. Dozens, sometimes hundreds of huge birds would descend upon the tower and clean the flesh from the bones in a matter of hours. After that, special attendants called nasasalers would collect the bones and throw them into the central pit, where they gradually crumbled to dust under the influence of the sun and wind. The most eerie part is that this ritual was not some distant medieval custom. The Towers of Silence in Yazd were used for their intended purpose until the 1960s. People who are now 60 or 70 years old remember seeing vultures circling over the towers in their childhood. Local elders say that on funeral days, processions in white robes stretched toward the towers, and a specific smell hung over the city that could not be confused with anything else. The Iranian government officially banned this rite in 1970. However, some researchers claim that in remote Zoroastrian communities, it was practiced for several more years after the ban, secretly at night so as not to attract the attention of the authorities. Today, the Tower of Silence is a tourist attraction. You can climb to the top, stand on that very stone platform, and look down into the central pit where human bones accumulated for centuries. The pit is empty. The remains were removed long ago. But when the wind wanders between the stones and a solitary bird circles above your head, your imagination begins to work against your will. You stand in a place where thousands of people were given to be eaten by birds, and you realize that for Zoroastrians, this was not a horror. but the highest form of respect for nature. They believed the body was merely a shell, and the soul left it 3 days after death. By giving the flesh to the birds, a person performed a final act of generosity, nourishing the living with their dead. In this logic, there is a haunting beauty that is hard to accept, but impossible not to respect. But the story of the Towers of Silence does not end there. Few know that Zoroastrian communities across Iran kept detailed records of every burial. These records, names, dates, causes of death, were maintained for centuries and represent a priceless demographic source that historians are only beginning to use. In them, one can trace waves of epidemics, periods of famine, and the consequences of wars. All of this is recorded in dry, bureaucratic language, behind which stand thousands of tragedies. When a researcher reads, "In the month of Tir, delivered to the Dakhma, Rustam, son of Bahram, 62 years old from fever. Shirin, daughter of Ardashir, 4 years old, cause unknown. Firus, son of Khosrau, 30 years old, from a wound." Behind every line is a real person whose body was lifted onto the stone platform and given to the vultures. These records are the voices of the dead sounding through the centuries, and they are still kept in the archives of the Zoroastrian community of Yazd, accessible only to a narrow circle of researchers. There is another aspect that guidebooks usually remain silent about. When the vulture population in Iran began to decline due to urbanization and the use of pesticides, the ritual faced a practical problem. There were not enough birds to clean a body in a few hours. The process dragged on for days, and the smell from the towers spread to the surrounding neighborhoods. The residents of Yazd began to complain, and this became one of the reasons the authorities finally banned the rite. Zoroastrians had to switch to burials in concrete graves, a compromise that no one likes, but which allows them to formally observe the principle of not defiling the earth. The concrete shell separates the body from the sacred soil. The second mystery is connected to a place Iranians call simply the cursed village, Kanatom. In the mountains of Khorasan province in northeastern Iran, among deserted gorges, stand the ruins of a village abandoned by its residents several decades ago. Mud brick houses, collapsed roofs, empty doorways from which the remains of wooden beams hang. Nothing unusual for the Iranian hinterland, where there are thousands of abandoned villages. No, this place has one feature that distinguishes it from all others. Locals from neighboring settlements categorically refuse to approach the ruins after sunset. Legend has it that the village was cursed several centuries ago after its inhabitants committed a terrible crime. They killed a wandering dervish who asked them for water and a place to stay. The dervish, while dying, uttered a curse. "The land beneath the village shall never again yield a harvest. The water in the wells shall turn bitter, and at night, among the houses, the shadows of those yet unborn but already doomed shall wander." Of course, this is a legend, and it is unlikely to frighten a rational person. But something else is interesting. The village really was abandoned, and the reasons are not entirely clear. Some researchers suggest that a geological fault passes under the settlement, through which sulfurous gases seep. In certain concentrations, these gases can cause headaches, hallucinations, feelings of inexplicable fear, and even loss of consciousness. If the wind changes direction and gases accumulate in enclosed spaces, the effect is intensified. People begin to see and hear things that are not there and explain it the only way available to them: a curse. Such cursed places are found throughout Iran, especially in mountainous and desert regions. The geological activity of the Iranian plateau, located at the junction of several tectonic plates, creates conditions for the release of underground gases, temperature anomalies, and strange acoustic effects. In the Dasht-e-Kavir desert, there are areas where the ground suddenly gives way underfoot, revealing underground voids. In the Zagros Mountains, there are caves from which sounds resembling human moans emanate. This is the wind passing through narrow stone crevices. But for a shepherd near it at night, this sound is indistinguishable from a voice. Iran is a country where geology itself creates the scenery for horror, and it is no wonder that its folklore is full of stories about cursed places, demons, and restless souls. It is worth adding that Iranian mythology populates deserts and mountains with creatures that have no direct analogues in Western tradition. Jinns are not those cheerful blue giants from Disney cartoons, but powerful and unpredictable spirits created from smokeless fire, capable of taking any form and inhabiting precisely abandoned places, ruins, caves, and empty wells. Iranians believe that before entering an abandoned building, one must say Bismillah, in the name of God, to warn the jinns of their presence and not provoke their wrath. This belief is so deeply rooted that even educated urban residents who use smartphones and read scientific journals in daily life subconsciously avoid abandoned places after dark. The line between the rational and the irrational in Iran is blurred much more than in Europe. And this is not a sign of backwardness, but the result of living on an earth that behaves unpredictably. The third mystery leads us deep underground, literally. In 2006, a group of Iranian speleologists exploring caves in South Khorasan province discovered something that took their breath away. Behind a narrow crawl space through which a person could barely squeeze, a giant underground hall opened up, its walls covered with thousands of drawings, figures of people, animals, and strange creatures with human bodies and bull heads. All of this was applied to the stone with ochre and charcoal thousands of years ago. But the most macabre part was not that. In the depths of the cave, in a separate chamber reached by an even narrower passage, researchers found dozens of human skulls neatly arranged along the walls. Some were damaged with characteristic holes that anthropologists believe could be traces of trepanation. Trepanation is a surgical operation in which holes are made in the skull. In ancient times, it was practiced worldwide, from South America to Europe, and is considered one of the oldest surgical procedures in history. However, the find in the Iranian cave baffled scientists for several reasons. First, the age of the skulls. Preliminary estimates pointed to a period from 5,000 to 7,000 years ago, making them some of the oldest evidence of trepanation in the Middle East. Second, some skulls had traces of bone tissue healing around the holes, meaning the patient survived the operation and lived for a long time. Ancient surgeons on Iranian territory knew how to open the skull, do something there, and yet not kill the patient 7,000 years ago. Without anesthesia, without sterile instruments, without any knowledge of brain anatomy in the modern sense. But why did they do it? This is where it gets interesting. Some skulls had no traces of healing. The operation was performed after death. Why open the skull of a dead person? Some anthropologists believe it was a ritual. Through the hole in the skull, the spirit of the deceased was released so it could freely leave the body. Others suggest it was a practice of collecting magical material, pieces of bone or tissue, which were then used for ritual purposes. A third group points out that the arrangement of skulls along the walls facing the center of the chamber resembles a ceremonial circle, a kind of underground temple of the dead. There is also a fourth hypothesis, more grounded. Perhaps the cave served as a trophy room. In some ancient Middle Eastern cultures, the skulls of enemies were kept as symbols of victory, and the underground chamber could have been a kind of Stone Age military museum. But this version does not explain the presence of female and child skulls among the finds, unless it involved sacrifice. Generally, Iran's caves are a separate and almost unexplored topic. The country is located on a limestone plateau, and beneath its surface hide thousands of caves, most of which have never been explored by professional speleologists. The Iranian Speleological Society, founded only at the end of the 20th century, discovers dozens of new cave systems every year, and every second find contains traces of human activity, from simple hearths to complex rock paintings. In Khorasan province, a cave was discovered with walls covered in images of creatures unlike any known animal. Figures with long limbs, disproportionately large heads, and something like wings behind their backs. Local archaeologists suggested these are stylized images of people in ritual costumes, but there is no consensus. The drawings could be 5,000 to 10,000 years old, and they raise more questions than they provide answers. The cave was sealed, access restricted, and full-scale excavations are yet to come. But what has already been found makes one wonder what other mysteries the Iranian land hides at depths where sunlight does not penetrate. The fourth mystery is one of the darkest pages of Iranian history, something people in Iran prefer not to talk about out loud. It concerns events in the city of Hamadan during the Middle Ages, mass plague epidemics that devastated Iranian cities with a regularity that makes one's blood run cold. Hamadan is one of the oldest cities in the world, the former capital of the Median Kingdom. It stands on a high plateau surrounded by mountains. It would seem to be an ideal place to live: clean mountain air, abundance of water, fertile soil. But it was precisely this position at the crossroads of trade routes between East and West that turned the city into an ideal incubator for epidemics. Caravans moving along the Silk Road brought not only silk and spices to Hamadan, but also fleas infected with the plague bacillus. When the plague came, it did not just kill, it devastated. Medieval chronicles describe scenes that make one's hair stand on end, streets littered with bodies that no one could bury, houses where entire families from elders to infants died in a single night. Survivors fled the city in terror, spreading the infection to neighboring villages. The Arab historian Ibn al-Athir described how, during one epidemic in Hamadan, so many people died in a few weeks that city dogs turned wild and began attacking the living because they were used to feeding on corpses. But the most macabre part is what happened underground. When there were too many dead for ordinary cemeteries, authorities ordered mass graves to be dug outside the city walls. Dozens, and by some estimates, hundreds of such pits were dug around Hamadan over several centuries of plague epidemics. Bodies were piled in layers, sprinkled with lime and covered with earth. Over time, the exact location of these burials was forgotten. The city grew, expanded, and new neighborhoods were built directly on top of the plague pits. When the installation of water and sewage systems began in Hamadan in the 20th century, workers repeatedly stumbled upon layers of bones and skulls, sometimes at a depth of only 1.5 to 2 meters. Some of these finds were so massive that construction had to be halted for weeks. Historians believe that plague epidemics claimed 30 to 60% of the population in affected cities. Hamadan survived such catastrophes repeatedly and rebuilt each time, filling with people from the villages who had no idea they were building their homes on the bones of the previous generation. The city stands on these bones today. Beneath its streets, parks, and residential quarters lie thousands of anonymous victims of epidemics, reminded of by not a single monument or memorial plaque. This is a secret Hamadan carries within itself silently, like a person who knows about their illness but prefers not to speak of it aloud. But Hamadan is not the only Iranian city with such a history. Tabriz, Isfahan, Ray, all major trade centers of medieval Iran, experienced plague catastrophes, and beneath each lie their own mass burials. Especially terrible was the Black Death, the plague pandemic of the mid-14th century, which destroyed, by various estimates, 1/4 to 1/3 of Iran's population. Entire cities turned into necropolises. The medieval historian Hamdallah Mustawfi, who lived in that era, wrote that in some areas there were so many dead that they were placed in empty houses and set on fire because there was not enough labor or land for normal burial. The smell of burning flesh hung over the cities for weeks. There is another ghastly aspect rarely mentioned. During an epidemic, the Zoroastrian community found itself in an especially difficult position. Their religion forbade both burial in the ground and cremation. The Towers of Silence could not cope with the flow of the dead. The vultures simply could not keep up. Bodies accumulated on the platforms, decomposing under the scorching sun, creating an additional source of infection. Some sources indicate that it was during epidemic periods that many Zoroastrians were forced to break religious prohibitions and resort to mass burials in the ground, an act perceived as a spiritual catastrophe almost equal to the plague itself. The fifth mystery takes us to a world whose existence most people do not even suspect, the world of Iranian underground cities. Yes, you heard right. Beneath the surface of Iran hide entire cities carved into the rock thousands of years ago. The most famous of them is Nushabad, located under the town of the same name in Isfahan province. When, in 2004, a local resident digging a well in his yard fell into a void, he could not imagine that he had just opened the entrance to an underground world 1,500 years old. The underground city of Nushabad is a three-level labyrinth of tunnels, rooms, ventilation shafts, and traps, carved into soft limestone at depths from 4 to 18 meters. Its total area has still not been fully established. Archaeologists continue to discover new tunnels and chambers, but what has already been explored is striking in its scale and thoughtfulness. There are residential quarters with niches for oil lamps, warehouses for food storage, wells with drinking water, and even a sewage system. The tunnels were intentionally made low and narrow, so much so that one can only move through them hunched over or on all fours. This is not a flaw. It is a defensive mechanism. An enemy entering a tunnel could not use weapons, could not move quickly, and became an easy target for defenders waiting around every corner. But the most ingenious part is the traps. In several places, a tunnel suddenly forks. One path leads deeper into the city, while the other leads to a dead end where the floor drops off into a vertical well several meters deep. In the darkness without a lantern, an intruder would inevitably choose the wrong path and fall into the pit. In other places, the tunnel ceiling drops sharply, forming a stone threshold that a tall person would hit their head against, losing orientation. Narrow slits in the walls were also found, through which defenders could strike with spears while remaining invisible. This underground city was designed as a perfect fortress where a handful of people could withstand an entire army. Historians believe Nushabad was built during the Sasanian Empire, approximately in the 3rd to 4th centuries AD, and was used as a refuge during invasions. Later, during the Arab conquest and then the Mongol invasion, locals hid here from invaders, taking their families, livestock, and food supplies with them. Some chambers bear traces of long-term habitation, soot-covered ceilings from oil lamps, notches in walls for storing utensils, even crudely carved shelves. People lived here for weeks, or perhaps months, waiting for the slaughter above to subside. Imagine, just a few meters above your head, enemies are burning your house and killing your neighbors, and you sit in the darkness, covering your child's mouth so they don't cry, praying they won't find the entrance. Archaeologists found a child's sandal in one of the chambers of Nushabad, small, worn, made of crudely tanned leather. It could be several hundred years old, or perhaps over 1,000. Exact dating has not yet been performed, but this sandal is the most eloquent artifact of everything found in the underground city. It says that children were here, children whose parents dragged them into the darkness to save them from the massacre above. Children who perhaps spent days or weeks in these tunnels in absolute darkness, eating supplies of flatbread and dried fruit, listening to the hooves of enemy horses thudding overhead. One child's sandal, and behind it stands a whole world of horror that no words can convey. And indeed, Nushabad is not the only underground city in Iran. Similar structures have been discovered in several other provinces, and archaeologists suspect there are many more than have been found to date. In Kerman province, an underground structure was discovered that, by preliminary estimates, could be even larger than Nushabad. In Khorasan province, locals had long known about strange holes in the ground from which warm steam rose in winter. It turned out these were ventilation shafts for another underground complex whose entrance had been blocked several centuries ago. There is a theory that Iran's underground cities were not isolated shelters, but elements of a single network. If so, a subterranean infrastructure comparable in scale to the catacombs of Rome or the underground cities of Cappadocia in Turkey may be hidden beneath the Iranian plateau. But unlike the Cappadocian cities, which are well studied and turned into tourist sites, Iranian undergrounds remain practically unexplored. The reasons are prosaic: lack of funding, bureaucratic hurdles, and, frankly, fear. Locals are reluctant to let researchers into the underground, and workers hired to clear the tunnels often quit after the first day, citing a bad premonition. A rational person would dismiss this as superstition, but spend a night in a tunnel at a depth of 15 meters in absolute darkness, listening to water dripping and stone cracking, and we'll see what you say in the morning. Beneath ordinary Iranian towns and villages, an entire parallel universe may be hidden. Dark, silent, preserving within its walls the echo of 1,000 years of fear. The sixth mystery is perhaps the strangest and most inexplicable. In Chahar Mahal and Bakhtiari province, in the heart of the Zagros mountain range, there is a place locals call the Valley of the Genies. It is a narrow gorge squeezed between sheer cliffs several hundred meters high, with a small river flowing along the bottom. During the day, it looks normal, a beautiful mountain landscape like thousands of others in Iran. But after sunset, everything changes. Residents of nearby villages say that at night, sounds emanate from the gorge that cannot be explained. It is not the howl of the wind or the noise of water. It is something between a low hum and a rhythmic tapping that intensifies then subsides, as if someone deep in the rocks is hitting stone with a hammer. Sometimes this is joined by a sound resembling distant singing, monotonous, wordless, on a single note. Local shepherds categorically refuse to drive their herds into this gorge after sunset, claiming that animals begin to get nervous and try to flee long before the sounds become audible to the human ear. Several rational explanations have been proposed. Geologists point out that the Zagros has many underground cavities and cracks through which air circulates. Temperature changes between day and night cause rock formations to expand and contract, which can cause characteristic tapping and cracking. Underground water flows passing through narrow stone channels can create resonant sounds resembling a hum or drone, and the singing could be the result of wind passing through rock crevices of a certain shape, the so-called singing rocks effect known to geologists worldwide. But there is one detail that doesn't fit any of these theories. A few years ago, a group of Iranian researchers installed sound recording equipment in the gorge and spent several nights there. They did record anomalous sounds, but they discovered something else. On certain nights under certain weather conditions, the air temperature in the gorge suddenly dropped by 8 to 10 degrees within minutes. This temperature jump did not correlate with the movement of air masses, changes in cloud cover, or any other meteorological factors. It simply happened, and after a while, the temperature just as suddenly returned to normal. The researchers honestly admitted they could not explain this phenomenon and suggested there might be an unknown system of underground cavities beneath the gorge where sudden changes in air pressure occur, affecting the surface. But this remains only a hypothesis. The Valley of the Genies still keeps its secret, and locals still bypass it when the sun goes down. Interestingly, similar acoustic anomalies have been recorded in other parts of Iran. In the Dashti Lut Desert, which we have already mentioned, there is a phenomenon locals call the voice of the desert. On certain days, usually at the end of summer when the daytime heat gives way to night coolness, a low, long hum emanates from the depths of the sands, resembling the operation of a giant engine somewhere beneath the surface. Geophysicists link this to the sharp compression of sand masses during cooling. Billions of sand grains simultaneously change volume, and the total sound produced by this process can be heard several kilometers away. But for nomads crossing the desert, this explanation means nothing. They know the desert speaks, and it's better to listen. In the Alborz Mountains north of Tehran, there is a cave locals call the Breath of the Div. Divs in Iranian mythology are demonic creatures, enemies of all living things, offspring of darkness and chaos. The cave is located at an altitude of about 3,000 meters, and a stream of warm air with a sharp sulfur smell periodically bursts from its entrance. In winter, when the surrounding temperature drops far below zero, this warm stream creates a cloud of steam over the cave entrance. From a distance, it looks like smoke coming from the rock. Geologists explain this by volcanic activity. Damavand, located nearby, is a dormant volcano, and hot gases from its depths can escape to the surface through cracks and caverns. But explanation and sensation are different things. When you stand before the black maw of a cave from which hot sulfurous steam bursts, your rational brain says volcanic activity, but something more ancient inside you says something else entirely. All these places, the Valley of the Genies, the voice of the desert, the breath of the Div, share one thing. They remind us that Iran stands on restless ground. The Iranian plateau is located at the junction of the Arabian and Eurasian tectonic plates, and this geological instability permeates the country's entire history. Earthquakes here are not a rarity, but a norm of life. In the 20th century, Iran experienced several devastating earthquakes that claimed tens of thousands of lives. The earthquake in Bam in 2003 destroyed the world's oldest mud brick fortress, Argi Bam, a masterpiece that had stood for over 2,000 years and killed more than 26,000 people. The land that created the conditions for a great civilization is the same land that periodically destroys that civilization. The seventh mystery is the largest and perhaps the most disturbing. It concerns not one place or one event, but an entire phenomenon unfolding right now before our eyes. And yet almost no one in the world knows about it. Iran is slowly sinking. No, that's not a metaphor. Iran is literally falling into the earth. Over the last 2 decades, satellite observations have recorded catastrophic land subsidence across the country. In some areas, the Earth's surface is sinking by 25 to 30 centimeters per year. This is an incredible speed. In 10 years, certain areas have sunk by 2 to 3 meters. Cracks hundreds of meters long cut through fields and roads. Buildings tilt and crack. Foundations split in half. In Isfahan province, cases have been recorded where residential buildings had to be urgently evacuated because they were literally going underground in front of the residents' eyes. The cause is the catastrophic depletion of groundwater. Iran is an arid country, and for decades the need for water was met by drilling more and more wells. By various estimates, over 700,000 legal and illegal wells have been drilled in the country, pumping water from underground aquifers faster than they can be replenished. When an aquifer is emptied, the ground above it loses support and begins to sink. This is an irreversible process. Even if all pumping stopped tomorrow, the earth would not rise back up. The structure of the soil is destroyed forever. The scale of the problem is hard to overestimate. Subsidence threatens historical monuments that have stood for thousands of years, including Persepolis and the mosques of Isfahan. Cracks in the ground cut across roads and railways, creating emergency situations. Some villages have already been completely evacuated because the land beneath them became uninhabitable. Iranian scientists are sounding the alarm, calling the situation a silent catastrophe. Silent because it happens slowly, unnoticed by the eye, without explosions or sirens, but with consequences that could be more destructive than any earthquake. And yet this is only the tip of the iceberg. Land subsidence is just one of the consequences of the water crisis that has gripped Iran. Lake Urmia, once one of the largest salt lakes in the world, has lost more than 80% of its volume and turned into a blood-red puddle. The Zayandarud River, which fed Isfahan for centuries and was the soul of the city, has been drying up for entire months in recent years. The stone riverbed with bridges spanning across emptiness has become one of the saddest sights in modern Iran. The Mesopotamian marshes in the southwest of the country, which for millennia were home to the unique culture of the marsh Arabs, have dried up and turned into a salt wasteland. Ancient qanats, underground water channels that worked for thousands of years, are drying up one after another because the groundwater level has fallen below their bottoms. But there is another detail that makes this situation truly nightmarish. Land subsidence creates cracks, and these cracks cut through not only fields and roads, they also cut through those very mass plague burials we spoke of earlier. When the earth sinks and cracks, layers sealed centuries ago can come to the surface. Iranian sanitary services periodically record cases where construction work or geological shifts uncover old burials. In most cases, this poses no danger. The plague bacillus does not survive in the ground for centuries. But the mere fact that the city is literally opening its old wounds creates a grim impression. There is also a more modern problem. Land subsidence in the Tehran area threatens infrastructure upon which millions of people depend. Water pipes burst, gas mains deform, power lines tilt. In 2017, a crack more than a kilometer long formed in the southern suburbs of Tehran, passing through a residential neighborhood. House walls split, foundations shifted, several buildings were declared unsafe. Residents were evacuated, but there was nowhere to relocate them because the subsidence affected a vast territory and safe areas are becoming fewer. People returned to their cracked homes, patched the gaps with cement, and continued to live because there is no alternative. Specialists from Tehran University developed a subsidence map on which the zones of highest risk are marked in red. This map looks terrifying. Red spots cover vast territories around Tehran, Isfahan, Mashhad, and other major cities. In essence, a large part of urbanized Iran is at risk, and the problem worsens every year because the population grows, the need for water increases, and new wells continue to be drilled legally and illegally. Experts warn that if the situation does not change, in 20 to 30 years, a significant part of Iran's territory could become uninhabitable. This is not an exaggeration or alarmism. This is the result of analyzing satellite data and hydrological models. A country that fed and watered its residents for 7,000 years risks losing the ability to do so within the span of a single generation. And the most eerie thing is that this is happening right now. Every day, every hour, while we are talking about it. The earth beneath Iran is slowly, silently, and inexorably falling away, and stopping this process may already be too late. But let's return from ecology to human stories, because they are what give these mysteries a truly sinister character. Behind each of the 7 mysteries are real people, those who kept these secrets, those who suffered from them, and those who accidentally uncovered them. Take, for example, the story of the man who discovered the underground city of Nushabad. His name was Hossein. He was an ordinary farmer. On that day, he simply wanted to deepen the well in his yard because the water in it had turned muddy. When the earth beneath his feet suddenly opened up and he fell into the darkness, the first thing he felt was the chilling cold of the underground air. He had no lantern. He stood in absolute darkness, in a silence broken only by the sound of dripping water, not knowing where he was. When neighbors pulled him out and went down with lanterns, they discovered a tunnel vanishing into the pitch black. The local mullah forbade entry, declaring it an abode of jinns. Several months passed before archaeologists learned of the find and began systematic excavations, or the story of the Towers of Silence. In the archives of the Zoroastrian community of Yazd, the records of the Nasa Salars, Those very attendants who lifted bodies to the top of the towers and prepared them for the ritual have been preserved. This was a hereditary profession passed from father to son. Nasasalers lived separately from the rest of the community. They were treated with respect, but also with wariness. They were people who encountered death daily. Their hands touched dead flesh. Their clothes smelled of decay. And according to Zoroastrian laws of ritual purity, they could not touch ordinary people without a special cleansing. The last Nasasalers of Yazd, who lived until the ban of the rite in 1970, said the hardest part was not the sight itself, you get used to that, but the silence. When the body was lifted onto the tower and laid on the stone, the waiting began. Sometimes vultures arrived in minutes, sometimes in hours. And all that time, the Nasasaler stood nearby, alone between earth and sky, between the dead and the living, waiting for nature to do its work. One of the last Nasasalers, whose memories were recorded in the 1980s, said the worst was winter. The vultures were reluctant to come, bodies stiffened on the cold stone, and a process that took hours in summer could stretch for a full day in winter. He stood on the tower all night, wrapped in sheepskin, listening to the howl of the wind and waiting for the dawn when the birds would finally descend. He said that on such nights, he talked to the dead, not because he believed they heard him, but simply because there was no one else. Each of these stories is like a layer in an archaeological excavation. You remove one, and under it is another, deeper and more frightening. Iran is a country that stands on thousands of layers of mysteries, and each new archaeological season, each construction site, each collapsed well reveals something new. Beneath the gleaming domes of mosques and behind the walls of palaces lies another Iran, dark, ancient, full of bones and silence. And you know what's strangest? Iranians know this. They grew up on these stories. They heard them from grandfathers and grandmothers. They live with them every day. But they are not afraid. Or more accurately, they have learned to live with fear. When your house stands on a plague burial, when a 1,000-year-old tunnel passes under your yard, when the mountains behind your village make inexplicable sounds at night, you either go mad or learn to accept it as part of life. Iranians chose the latter. They brew tea, spread carpets, read Hafiz's poetry, and continue to live on an earth that holds more secrets than any other earth on the planet. This, perhaps, is the main mystery of Iran. Not in the towers, not in the caves, and not in the underground cities, but in the ability of 70 million people to live a normal life on top of 7,000 years of nightmares. Next time you see a photo of an Iranian mosque with a turquoise dome or a smiling merchant at a bazaar, remember, under that dome, rituals were once performed whose meaning is lost forever. Under that bazaar, hundreds of anonymous victims of a plague epidemic might lie. And in the mountains behind that city is a gorge where locals do not go after sunset. Iran is not one country. It is many countries superimposed on each other. And the deeper you dig, the darker it becomes. The 7 mysteries we have told are only a small part of what the Iranian land hides. Archaeologists find new caves with ancient drawings every year. Builders fall into new underground cavities every year. Geologists record new cracks in the sinking soil every year. There is something symbolic in the fact that all 7 mysteries are somehow connected to what is beneath the surface. Towers of silence, a ritual after which the remains went into a pit. Cursed villages, gases rising from geological faults. Caves with skulls, underground chambers hidden for thousands of years. Plague burials, mass graves under the foundations of modern houses. Underground cities, entire labyrinths carved into the rock. Valley of the Genies, anomalies generated by underground processes. Land subsidence, earth that literally falls into a void. Iran is a country where the most frightening things are always hidden below, under your feet, behind a thin crust of soil and stone. And perhaps that is why Iranians are so protective of what is above, the beauty of their mosques, the patterns of their carpets, the melodies of their music. When you know that beneath your feet are bones, darkness, and emptiness, you especially value light, color, and sound. When you live on an earth that can open up at any moment, you build domes that reach for the sky. When your history is 7,000 years of catastrophes, you write poems about love and wine. Iran continues to keep its secrets patiently, silently, as it has for the last 7,000 years. And perhaps the most macabre among them are yet to be uncovered. Somewhere under the Iranian plateau, in a tunnel into which no human has peered, in a cave whose entrance is blocked by stones, in a layer of earth that no archaeologist has reached, lies the 8th mystery, the 9th, the 10th, and hundreds of others we may never know. Because Iran is a country that knows how to wait. It waited 7,000 years. It will wait more, and we will dig. Because every time someone drops a shovel into Iranian soil, they risk stumbling upon something that will overturn everything we knew. And if the history of this country teaches us anything, it is that the most important discoveries always lie a bit deeper than we are ready to dig, a bit further than we are ready to go, and a bit darker than we are ready to look.